Hello, everyone. It is Monday night. It is 8 p.m. here on the east side of the United States, here in the diaspora. This is the Maimon Beit Knesset, therefore it must be Zeyde Story Corner, of course. That's why you're all here. Okay, let's see who we have in the chat room. Okay, so we have Regina is in the chat room. And we have Ronald and Yehuda and Simcha and the Marshal. Good to have you all here tonight as we celebrate the return of some of our people. We are so happy and we hope that all the rest come back home safely. Okay, let us get on with our stories tonight. We have a couple of good stories tonight. So let's get right to it, shall we? Our first story is called The Pope's Game of Chess. I thought these were Jewish. It's a Jewish story. Don't worry about it. Okay, if you say so. Well, let's find out. Okay. Nearly 1,000 years ago, in the town of Mainz, which has a different name now. I think it's called Mainz or something like that. On the banks of the Rhine, there dwelt a pious Jew of the name of Simon ben Isaac, of a most charitable disposition, learned and ever ready to assist the poor with money and wise counsel. He was revered by all, and it was believed that he was a direct descendant of David Hamelech, King David. Everyone was proud to do him honor. Simon ben Isaac had one little son, a bright boy of the name of Elkanah, who he intended should be trained as a rabbi. Little Elkanah was very diligent in his studies and gave very early promise of developing into an exceptionally clever student. Even the servants in the household loved him for his keen intellect. One of them, indeed, was unduly interested in him. She was the Sabbath fire woman, who only came into the house on the Sabbath day to attend to the fires. Because, as you know, the Jewish servants could not perform this duty. The Sabbath fire woman, today we call that a Shabbos goy. So it just means that a person who comes in and turns on the lights and so on and so forth. Okay, so anyway, the Sabbath fire woman was a devout Catholic, and she spoke of Elkanah to a priest. The latter was considerably impressed. What a pity, he remarked, that so talented a boy should be a Jew. If he were a Christian now, he added winningly, he could enter the Holy Church and become famous. If you call that famous, yeah, okay. The Sabbath fire woman knew exactly what the priest meant. Do you think he could rise to be a bishop? She asked. He might rise even higher, to be the Pope himself, replied the priest. It would be a great thing to give a bishop to the church, would it not? Said the woman. It is a great thing to give anyone to the Church of Rome, the priest assured her. Then they spoke in whispers. The woman appeared a little troubled, but the priest promised her that all would be well. and she would be rewarded, and that nobody would dare to accuse her of doing anything wrong. Convinced that she was performing a righteous act, how about that? She agreed to do what the priest suggested. Accordingly, the following Friday night, when the household of Simon ben Isaac was wrapped in slumber, she crept stealthily and silently into the boy's bedroom. Taking him gently in her arms, she stole silently out of the house and carried him to the priest who was waiting. Elkanah was well wrapped up in blankets, and so cautiously did the woman move that he did not awaken. The priest said not a word. He just nodded to the woman and then placed Elkanah in a carriage which he had in waiting. Elkanah slept peacefully, totally unaware of his adventure. And when he opened his eyes, he thought he must be dreaming. He was not in his own room, but a much smaller one which seemed to be jolting and moving like a carriage. And opposite to him was a priest. "Where am I?" he asked in alarm. "Lie still, Andres," was the reply. "But my name is not Andres," he replied. "That is not a Jewish name. I am Elkanah, the son of Simon." To his amazement, however, the priest looked at him pityingly and shook his head. "You had a nasty accident," he said, "and it has affected your head. You must not speak." Not another word would he say in response to all the boy's eager queries. He simply ignored Elkanah, who puzzled his head over the matter until he really began to feel ill and to wonder whether he was Elkanah after all. Tired out, he fell asleep again. The next time he awoke, he was lying on a bed in a bare room. A bell was tolling, and he heard a chanting chorus. By his side stood the priest. Elkanah looked at the priest like one dazed. Before he could utter a word, the priest said, "Arise, Andres, and follow me." The boy had no alternative but to obey. To his horror, he was taken into a chapel and made to kneel. The priest sprinkled water on him. He did not understand what the servants meant. But when it was over, he began to cry for his father and mother. For days, nobody took the slightest notice of his continual questioning until a priest, with a harsh, cruel face, spoke to him severely one day. "I perceive, Andreas," he said, "thou hast a stubborn spirit. It shall be curbed. Thy father and mother are dead. All the world is dead to thee. Thou hast strange notions in thy head. We shall rid thee of them." Elkanah cried so much on hearing these terrible words that he made himself seriously ill. How long he was kept in bed he knew not. But when he recovered, he found himself a prisoner in a monastery. All the priests called him Andreas, and they were kind to him, and in time he began to doubt himself whether he was Elkanan, the son of Simon, the pious Jew of Mayence. To put an end to the unrest in his mind, he devoted himself earnestly to his lessons. His tutors never had so brilliant a pupil, nor did so intelligent a companion. He was a remarkable chess player. Where did you learn? They asked him. My father, Simon ben Isaac of Mayence, taught me, he replied with a sob in his voice. It is well, they replied, having received their instructions what to say in answer to such remarks. Thou art blessed from heaven, Andreas. Not only dost thou absorb learning in the hours of daylight, but angels and dead sages visit thee in thy sleep and impart knowledge unto thee. He could obtain no more satisfactory words from his tutors, and in time he made no mention whatever of the past, and his tutors and companions refrained from touching upon the subject either. Once or twice he formed the idea of endeavoring to escape, but he soon discovered the project impossible. He was never allowed to be alone for a moment. He was virtually a prisoner, although all men began to do him honor because of his amazing knowledge and learning. In due time, he became a priest and a tutor, and was even called to Rome, and was created a cardinal. He wore a red cap and cloak. People kneeled to him and sought his blessing, and all spoke of him as the wisest, kindest, and most scholarly man in the church. He had not spoken of his boyhood for years, but he never ceased to think of those happy days. And although he tried hard, he could not believe that it was all a dream. Whenever he played a game of chess, which was his one pastime, he seemed to see himself in his old room in Mayence, and he sighed. His fellow priests wondered why he did this, and he laughingly told them it was because he had no idea how to lose a game. Then a great event happened. The Pope died, and Andreas was elected his successor. He was placed on a throne. A crown was put on his head, and he was called Holy Father. The power of life and death over millions of people in many countries was vested in him. Kings, princes, and nobles visited him in his great palace to do him homage, and his fame spread far and wide. But he himself grew more thoughtful and silent, and sought only to exercise his great powers for the people's good. This, however, did not altogether please some of his counselors. The church needs money, they told him. We must squeeze it out of the Jews. But Andreas steadily refused to countenance any persecutions. Many edicts were placed before him for his signature, giving permission to bishops in certain districts to threaten the Jews unless they paid huge sums of money in tribute. But Andreas declined to assent to any one of them. One day, a document was submitted to him from the Archbishop of the Rhine district, craving permission to drive the Jews from the city of Mayence. The Pope's face hardened when he read the iniquitous letter. He gave instant orders that the Archbishop should be summoned to Rome, and to the utter amazement of the cardinals, he also commanded them to bring before him 3 leading Jews from Mayence to state their case. Aha, the plot thickens, eh? It shall not be said, he declared, that the Pope issued a decree of punishment without giving the people condemned an opportunity for defending themselves. Oh, I see Richard and Veronica has joined us. Good to see you. When the news reached Mayence, there was great wailing and sorrow among the Jews, for, alas, bitter experience had taught them to expect no mercy from Rome. Delegates were selected, and when they arrived at the Vatican, they were asked for their names. These were given and communicated to the Pope. The delegates of the Jews of the city of Mayence, announced the secretary, humbly crave audience with your holiness. Their names, demanded the Pope: Simon ben Isaac, Abraham ben Moses, and Issachar the priest. Let them enter, said the Pope in a firm, quiet voice. He had heard but one name. His plan had proven successful, for he had counted upon Simon being one of the chosen delegates. The 3 men entered the audience chamber and stood expectantly before the Pope. His Holiness appeared to be lost in deep thought. Suddenly, he aroused himself from his reverie and looked keenly at the aged leader of the party. Simon of Mayence, stand forth, he said, and give voice to thy plea. We give thee attention. The old man approached a few paces nearer, and in simple but eloquent language pleaded that the Jews should be permitted to remain unmolested in Mayence, in which city their community had been long established. Thy prayer, said the Pope when he had finished, shall have full consideration, and my answer shall be made known to thee without delay. Now, tell me, Simon of Mayence, something of thyself and thy co-delegates. Who are ye in the city? Simon gave the information. Have ye come hither alone? Asked the Pope. Or have ye been escorted by members of your family? Your sons, perhaps? The Pope's voice was scarcely steady, but none noticed. I have no sons, said Simon with a weary sigh. Hast thou never been blessed with offspring? Simon looked sharply at the Pope before answering. Then, with bowed head and broken voice, he said, God blessed me with one son, but he was stolen from me in childhood. That has been the sorrow of my life. The old man's voice was choked with sobs. I have heard, said the Pope, after a while, that thou art famed as a chess player. I, too, am credited with some skill in the game. I would fain pit it against thine. Hearken, if thou prove the victor in the game, then shall thy appeal prevail. I consent, said the old man proudly. It is many years since I have sustained defeat. It was arranged that the game should be played that evening. Naturally, this strange contest aroused the keenest interest. The game was followed closely by the papal secretaries and the Jewish delegates. It was a wonderful trial of subtle play. The two players seemed about evenly matched. First one and then the other made daring moves which appeared to place an opponent in difficulties, but each time disaster was ingeniously evaded. A draw seemed the likeliest result until suddenly the Pope made a brilliant move which startled the onlookers. It was considered impossible now for Simon to avoid defeat. No one was more astounded at the Pope's move than the old Jew. He rose trembling from his chair, gazed with piercing eyes into the face of the Pope, and said huskily, Where didst thou learn that move? I taught it to but one other. Who? Replied the Pope eagerly. I will tell thee alone, said Simon. The Pope made a sign, and the others left the room in great surprise. Then Simon exclaimed excitedly, Unless thou art the devil himself, thou canst only be my long-lost son Elkanan. Father, cried the Pope, and the old man clasped him in his arms. When the others, sounds like Joseph, doesn't it? Yeah, kind of a little bit. When the others re-entered the room, the Pope said quietly, We have decided to call the game a draw, and in thankfulness for the rare pleasure of a game of chess with so skillful a player as Simon of Mayence, I grant the prayer of the delegates of the city. It is my will that the Jews shall live in peace. Shortly afterwards, a new pope was elected. Various rumors gained currency. One was that Andreas had thrown himself into the flames. Another that he had mysteriously disappeared. And at the same time, a stranger arrived in Mayence and was welcomed by Simon joyfully as his son Elkanan. What a wonderful story, huh? Okay. Appropriate for what's going on today, huh? Kidnapped and then returned, huh? Okay. We are going to take our 6-minute break now, and then when we come back, we will have another story. This story is called The Slave's Fortune. A very, very interesting story that has a puzzle in it. Should be good. Okay, so everybody, please stay tuned. We be back in 6.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
It's intermission time, folks, so hurry, hurry, hurry. Step right over to our refreshment center for the most extravagant array of refreshment goodies ever assembled under one roof. Enjoy breathtaking, mouth-watering goodies, everything from a snack to a delicious full meal. At our refreshment center, you'll find a large variety of goodies to satisfy your hunger, your thirst, or your sweet tooth. So hurry, hurry, hurry. Visit our refreshment center now. The show starts in 5 minutes. The show starts in 4 minutes. The show starts in 3 minutes. The show starts in 2 minutes. show starts in 1 minute. And now, on with the show.
And we are back, just as promised. Okay. So let us go on with our next story. You know, we should actually give credit for the stories that we are reading. They are from the book Jewish Fairy Tales and Legends by Aunt Naomi. Well, actually retold by Aunt Naomi, because some of these stories are actually very old. They've been told and retold and told again many times over many centuries. Okay, so we're going on to our next story, which is called The Slave's Fortune. This is interesting because there's a bit of a puzzle in here. Okay, so Ahmed was the only child of the wealthiest merchant in Damascus. His father devoted his days to doing everything possible to anticipate his wishes. The boy returned his father's love with interest, and the two lived together in the utmost happiness. They were seldom apart, the father curtailing his business journeys so that he could hastily return to Damascus, and finally restricting his affairs to those which he could perform in his own home. For safety's sake, Ahmed, whenever he was out of his father's sight, was attended by a big black slave, Pedro, an imposing-looking person, richly attired as befitted his station and duties. Pedro was a faithful servant, and he and Ahmed were the firmest of friends. When Ahmed, it says Ahmed, but it should say Ahmed. So when Ahmed grew up to be a youth, his father decided to send him to Jerusalem to be educated. He did so reluctantly, knowing, however, that it was the wisest course to adopt. Gently he broke the news to Ahmed, for he knew the latter would dislike to leave home. Ahmed was truly sorry to have to be parted from his father, but he kept back his tears and said bravely, "It is thy wish, father, therefore I question it not. I know thou dost only for my welfare." Very similar to what we say to Hashem, huh? Okay. No matter what the circumstances, we say, we know you do it for our own good. Okay, back to the story. "Well spoken, my son," said the father. "May I take Pedro with me?" asked Ahmed. "Nay, that would not be seemly," answered the father gently. "It would make the appearance, thee appear anxious to display thy wealth. Such ostentation will induce people to regard thee and thy father as foolish persons. possessed of more wealth than is good for the exercise of wisdom. Also, my son, thy future teaching must not be confined to the learning that wise men can impart unto thee. Thou art going to the great city to learn the ways of the world, to train thyself in self-reliance, and to prepare thyself for all the duties of manhood. The youth was somewhat disappointed to hear this. It was the first occasion, as far as his memory could serve him, that his father had failed to grant his wish. But he was nevertheless flattered by the prospect of quickly becoming a man. And he answered, I bow to thy wisdom, my father. He left for Jerusalem after bidding the merchant an affectionate farewell, and in the holy city he applied himself diligently, whatever that word is, diligently to his studies. They must have, my glasses probably need cleaning. Do you think so? Well, maybe that's it. If that's the story you're going to go with, that's the one we'll go with. Okay, that's what we'll go with. Smudges on the glasses. Okay, anyway, so he applied himself diligently to his studies. He delighted his teachers with his cheerful attention to his lessons, and discovered a new source of happiness in learning things for himself from observation. Also, it was a pleasant sensation to conduct his own affairs, and in the great city, with its busy, narrow thoroughfares and its wonderful buildings, he daily grew less homesick. Regularly he received letters by messengers from his father, and dutifully he returned by the same means long epistles setting out all the big and little things that made up his life. A year passed, and one day the usual message that Ahmed expected came to him in a strange handwriting. He opened it hastily, with foreboding of evil and alarm. The writer of the letter was one of the merchant's closest friends. He said, O worthy son of the most worthy father, greeting to thee, and may God give thee strength to hear the terrible and sad tidings which is my sorrowful duty to convey unto him. Know then that it hath pleased God in his wisdom to call from this earth thy saintly father, to sit with the righteous ones in heaven. Here in the city of Damascus there is great weeping, for thy honored father was the most upright of men, a friend to all in distress, a man whose bounteous charity to the poor and unfortunate was unsurpassed. But hard grief, deep and heartfelt as it is, cannot be compared to thine. We have all lost a wise counselor, a trusty friend, a guide in all things. But thou hast lost more. Thou hast lost a father. Thou art his only son, and on thee his duties will now devolve. Know then, thy profound grief we share with thee. We tender to thee our sincere sympathy, and eagerly do we wait thy coming. Thou hast a noble position to occupy, and a tradition to continue. We, thy father's friends, and thine, O Ahmed, will assist thee. The young man was dumbfounded when he heard the purpose of the letter. For some moments he spoke not, but sat on the ground, weeping silently. Then, remembering his father's admonitions, he promptly took up the task of settling his affairs in Jerusalem prior to his departure for Damascus. I will take with me, he said, the good rabbi who has been my religious instructor, for I am not fully prepared to undertake all the duties that will fall to my lot and need some strengthening counsel. On arrival in Damascus, he was greeted by a large concourse of people who expressed their sympathy with him and spoke in terms of highest praise of his father's benevolence. After the funeral, Ahmed called the leading townspeople together to hear his father's will read, for he was certain that many gifts to charities would be announced. Such was the case, and there were subdued murmurs of applause when the amounts were read forth. Then suddenly, the friend who had written to the young man and was reading the will paused. "I fear there must be a mistake," he said in a whisper to Ahmed. "Go on," urged the assembled people, and the man read in a strange voice, "And now, having, as I hope, faithfully performed my duty to the poor, I bequeath the rest of my possessions unto my devoted black slave, Pedro." "Pedro!" cried the astonished crowd. They looked at the massive figure of the black attendant, but he stood motionless and impassive, betraying no sign whatsoever of joy or surprise. Ahmed could not conceal his bewilderment. "Is naught left unto me?" he managed to ask. "Yes," returned his friend, and amid a sullen silence he continued to read. "This bequest is subject to the following proviso, that one thing be given to my son before the division of my property, the same to be selected by him within 24 hours of the reading of this will unto him." The crowd melted away with mutterings of sympathy mingled with astonishment, but out of earshot of Ahmed, all said the merchant must have been mad to draw up so absurd a testament. Ahmed himself could hardly realize the great blow that had befallen him. He consulted with his father's friend and the rabbi, but although they reread the document many times, they could find no fault or flaw in it. "Legally, this is correct and in perfect order and cannot be altered," said the friend. "My father must have made a foolish mistake and must have misplaced the two words son and slave," said Ahmed bitterly. "That does not so appear," said the rabbi. "Thy father was a scholar and wise man. Speak not hastily, And above all, act not rashly without thought. I will counsel thee to sleep over this matter, and in the morning we shall solve this puzzle. Ahmed, who was exhausted with grief and rage and surprise, soon fell into a deep sleep. And when he awoke, the rabbi was reciting the morning prayers. "It is a beautiful day," he said when he had finished. "The sun shines on thy happiness, Ahmed." Ahmed was too depressed to make any comment, nor was he completely satisfied when the rabbi assured him all would be well. "I have pondered deeply and long over thy father's words," he said. "I sat up throughout the night until the dawn, and I have been impelled to the conclusion that thy father was truly a wise man." Ahmed interrupted with a gesture of disapproval. The rabbi took no notice, but proceeded quietly. "Thy father must have feared that in thy absence after his death, and pending thy possible delay in returning hither, slaves and others might rob thee of thy inheritance. Pedro, I have discovered, knew of the terms of the will. By informing him and making his strange will, thy father, O fortunate Ahmed, made sure thy inheritance unto thee." "I understand not," muttered Ahmed. "It is perfectly clear," said the rabbi. "As soon as thou art ready, thou shalt make thy choice of one thing. Do as I bid thee, and thou shalt see thy father's wisdom." Ahmed had no option but to agree. He could find no solution himself, and wretched though he felt, reason told him that his father loved him, and the rabbi was renowned for his shrewdness. The townspeople gathered early to hear Ahmed make his choice of one thing, and one only, from his father's possessions. Ahmed looked less troubled than they expected. The rabbi wore his most benign expression, and Pedro stationed himself in his usual place at the door, statuesque, obedient, and expressionless as ever. Ahmed held up his hand to obtain silence. "Acting under the terms of my father's will," he said solemnly, "at this moment, when all, before division, belong to his estate, I choose but one of my father's possessions." What do you think it was? Would it have been the house? Maybe all the gold in the basement? What do you think it might have been? Pedro, the black slave. Then everyone saw the wisdom of the strange will, for with Pedro, Ahmed became possessed of his father's vast wealth. To Pedro, who still stood motionless, Ahmed said, "And thou, my good friend, shalt have thy freedom and possessions sufficient to keep thee in comfort for the rest of thy days." "I desire naught but to serve thee," Pedro answered. "I wish to remain the faithful attendant of one who will follow nobly in the footsteps of thy father." And so everybody was satisfied. And that is the end of our story. So what did you think? Good story, huh? Okay. So that's going to conclude. The next story is another long one. So we're not going to start, and we're not going to have a cliffhanger. So next time will be the Paradise in the Sky will be the next story. Very interesting one too. Okay. So tomorrow night is the rabbis discuss, and the rabbis are going to talk about the Balfour Declaration of 1917 and the what was it? The Peace Conference of 1920. The one that established the Jews in Palestine. So anyway, that's tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern. And Wednesday is the Torah study for the Parsha of the week. And then on Friday is Kabbalat and Mariv Shabbat service. And then on Shabbat morning, Shachrit and Musaf service. And then right back here on Monday for more stories on Zeyde Story Corner. Until then, my dear friends, we will simply say, Laila Tov.